What's up, everyone? Welcome back to my home studio. Again, I'm Chad Cordeiro, printer at Danger Gevaar Studio and David Krut Projects. And we're going to continue our demo on Drypoint's plate making and printing, which we started already with preparation, cleaning your plate, preparing an acetate registration to print. Today, we are going to run through different kinds of tools, how to make a Drypoint needle, how to transfer your image or drawing onto the plate, how to draw directly onto the plate, and then different mark making techniques that you can employ using those tools. Okay, so the first thing that I'd like to go through is how to make your own Drypoint needle. So we need a skewer stick or anything that has some flex and that you can easily cut into with a blade. We have a sewing pin, have some polyester thread, and a blade. You don't necessarily need to use polyester. This is just what I have right now. You can use fishing gut, bookbinding thread, cotton thread, wax thread would probably be better, but it's what I have access to at the moment. So what you want to start by doing is cutting off the end of the skewer stick. You can do that by applying pressure and just rolling the stick under the blade until it breaks off. Next step is you want to put the blade in the middle of your cut just to split it in half. You go 5 or 6 centimeters into stick, just so that it's split at the top. The next step is you're going to take the sewing pin and feed it into the area that you just split. And leave about that much out. So the next part takes a little while. So when you're unrolling your thread, you want to double it just to have it a bit stronger. And then you want to start by threading the loop around the needle and into the split like that. That way you can start wrapping. You want to keep the thread tight as you're wrapping it because you want to pull each of those split sides of the skewer stick together to create as much pressure on the needle as possible, just to keep it in place when you're drawing. So once you have about 10 to 15 centimeters of thread left after you're done wrapping, you want to use your index finger to hold that side, go around, and then feed the end through the loop, like that, and then pull tight. And that's your Drypoint needle. Pretty solid. It takes pressure, and it's quite a fine point, so you'll get quite a fine detailed Drypoint mark. Okay, so the next step, what we're going to do is use a wax crayon. This is a water-soluble wax crayon called a Woody. It's made by Stabilo. So what you're going to do is create a coating on the back of your paper in the same area as your image. You'll hold it up to the light so you can see through the paper, so you know where to put down your wax layer. So you can obviously draw directly on the plates, which we will do a bit later. If you're less confident, you're trying it out for the first time, I suggest starting by transferring your drawing that you did on paper, because a lot of people are much more comfortable with paper than they are drawing directly onto a plate. You want to line your image up and then tape the page in place. And you obviously don't need to put anything underneath it this time, because what's going to transfer is the crayon that you put on the back. So let's see. Okay, so it didn't transfer super well. I went back into what was there with a blue pen and just reinforced some of the lines. So you can see some of the areas that are purple, like here for instance. Just reinforce that part with pen, just so you can see what's on the plate from your drawing. And I'll show you guys how to do the next part, which is drawing directly onto the plate with marker. So these are, I guess, social distancing birds that I'm doing after I was watching some minor birds fight in the garden. So marker probably works the best if you just freehand directly onto the plate. So the next step is to start drawing or dry pointing your plate. I have some tools set out here. It's the dry point tool that we made with the sewing pin, the scoring needle or dry point needle, which has multiple uses, as you guys know from our paper video. An old nail that I haven't sharpened, it's quite blunt, and a screw, which is a bit sharper. And then I have 2 grades of sandpaper. So this is an old piece of quite low grit sandpaper, which means it's really, really coarse. And this is a piece of water paper, which is 1500 to 2000 grit, so it's super fine. It'll give you a really soft gray tone. So what I want to do is start really lightly with this small dry point tool, the really thin tool that we made, to just get the lines on there. If anything happens, I don't need to redraw or retrace. I'm just going super lightly for now. We can reinforce, create harder edges later. It should give you a fairly decent sense of what you've dry pointed. Now that that's done, you can kind of see what's down. Not every line is going to fill, because obviously it's wax crayon and pen ink that's going into the marks, but you can kind of see that there is something down. Other tools you can use, the nail. The nail's not sharp, so it's going to kind of dent the plates and create quite a large burr. You can see the difference immediately between the line quality that I'm making with the nail versus the pen that we used. Hope you can kind of tell, you can kind of see the difference between that mark over there and the marks that I made with the thinner needle. I think it's important to explain what a burr is. The burr is the thing that holds ink when you're making a dry point plate. When you're etching a plate, you're removing material from the plate, or the chemical is breaking down the copper and then removing that material from the plate. When you're doing a dry point, however, you're moving material. So you're not taking any material away, you're just forcing it into a different place. What happens is when you drag the needle across the surface of the plate, this is the surface of the plate, it creates needle indentation, but as it's scraping across the surface, it's throwing little pieces of copper up and onto the edge of the line. So when you ink up your plates, your ink will sit not only in the actual line that you created with the needle, but would also sit underneath and in between each of those mini copper filings, is the best way to describe it. So you'll have a solid line of ink, but then you'll also have this fuzzy halo effect on either side of the mark because of that burr of copper that stands up on the surface of the plate. So next I'm going to show you how to create flat tone without having to etch your plate. What we're going to do first is tape up the area, which you obviously don't want to have tone on it, and then using quite a low grit sandpaper, so you want to make sure that it's quite evenly covered. If there's any difference in tone, it'll show when you print. Now that stripe at the bottom of the plate will print as gray or black, depending on the grits and how much you sanded. So what you can also do is draw with a higher grit sandpaper, so a more fine sandpaper, and just create tone in certain areas. So at this point, I'm just gonna clean the plate with terps. So yeah, you can kind of see what we've done. These birds are done with the thin sewing pin tool. These arrows are done with the blunt nail, which is up here. This flat tone area at the bottom is done with low grit, coarse sandpaper. And then these really subtle shadow areas are done with the fine water paper. So I'm going to go back into small areas with this scoring needle. So all the areas that I want a bit darker, I want a bigger burr, more of a fuzzy edge. Obviously, depending on the pressure I apply with each of these tools, I'll get a bigger or smaller burr or a thicker or thinner line. So now that I've gone back into those marks, what some artists like to do while they're working on dry points is put ink onto the plates and into the marks while they're working. So I have some Gamblin Portland Black etching ink, and I took some out with my finger. I'm just gonna dab a tiny amount on some of the birds, just so that I can see what they look like. Just rub the ink in there. And what you can do is use a rag. Just wipe the ink away. So at the beginning of this demo, I spoke about how Intaglio is the opposite or the reverse of relief, in that everything that you put down onto the plates will print as black. Why that is because you're not rolling ink onto the surface of a plate and printing. What you're doing is you're rubbing the ink into the marks that you make with the tools, into the scratches, into the burrs, into the lines. So effectively doing this, rubbing the ink in without necessarily printing the plates, won't give you a full sense of what the print looks like, but will give you a better sense of what kind of tools and what kind of marks you're making and which tools make which marks. A lot of artists do this to help them because it's very difficult to see what you've drawn on the dry point plates or how those marks will read once they're printed. Dry point is very much a process of drawing on the plates, pulling a proof print, looking at the prints, and drawing back into the plate to get exactly what you want out of the image. Very seldom, if ever, do artists just draw the plate and proof it once and then it's finished. Lino cut, that happens sometimes, or very much less than it does with lino as an example. So proofing plates is key when you're making dry point prints, because it's generally very hard to see what you put down on the plate. And the only true sense you'll really get is by inking it up and running it through the press. So now that I've done that, we kind of have a better sense of what each of the different tools did on the plate and how they'll print. So you can see the thin kind of lines with the pin tool. These marks in the leg were done with the scoring needle, so you can see how it changes depending on how I wipe it. If you wipe a lot of the ink away, it gets kind of much more detailed. You don't want to lose everything, so again, when you're proofing the plate, it's about building it up through proofs to the point where what you're printing and the way you're wiping the plate is exactly what you want to transfer to the image. We've covered basics of dry point mark making, also some kind of alternative methods to etching if you want tone on a dry point plate. Keep watching the videos. There will be more videos on more advanced techniques for dry point, on tone, polishing back certain areas, as well as burnishing or removing dry point lines on the surface of the plates. There's various artists who have various different hands, various ways of producing their dry point plates. Diane Victor, as an example, is someone who makes an incredible amount of dry point plates that are incredibly beautiful and quite detailed in the way that she works. Deborah Bell is someone that works with dry point in quite an intense, layered kind of way by building up areas and burnishing them back. Working with dry points not as something that's permanent on the plate, but something that builds up over time, building up and removing burrs. Rhett Martin has some quite sculptural, really intense dry points in which the pressure of the mark making becomes an important quality to the work. Looking at all these different kinds of dry points and the way different people approach dry points is important in understanding, number one, how your hand works in relation to the plate, but also understanding the broad spectrum of what's possible when you're making dry point prints. Please watch the next video. We'll be proofing this plate. I'll be showing you guys how to ink up, wipe down, and then print dry point or intaglio plates with damp paper and ink. Be safe. Thank you for joining me once again.